Okay, good morning and welcome to the 5th Annual Aspen Institute Symposium on the State of Race in America. I'm Charlie Firestone, Director of the Aspen Institute Communications and Society Program. And the Aspen Institute is a nonpartisan nonprofit aimed at enlightened leadership based on timeless values. And our Communications and Society Program is a policy program that looks at the impact of information and communications technologies on our democratic institutions and values. We're pleased to be working once again for this 5th year with Comcast Corporation, and we'll say a little more about them in a minute. This symposium will explore the opportunities and challenges for people of color in the 21st century America. We look particularly at the issues of policing and young people of color, at data-driven discrimination, and at jobs for people of color in the new economy. So while we'll consider how people have made progress, this country has made progress on the racial front, we'll also examine some familiar problems that are persisting and particularly in the past year have even intensified. Issues of race have plagued this country really since colonial times. For over 300 years, we've struggled with the adoption of the Constitution, at the time of the Civil War, Jim Crow, the Civil Rights era, and on into today. There's been progress as we've gone along, but we still face race-related issues throughout. And in order for this to be an effective democracy, we really have to deal with these issues. So today's dialogue will touch on individual, cultural, institutional, and structural causes of racial problems, looking towards new and viable solutions in the context of our panel topics today. We'll be defining these problems with the purpose of finding solutions, hopefully, what we can do to remove racial tensions. So the purpose of this session, this day, is to do what the Aspen Institute does best, which is to have a safe, non-ideological space to have an informed and educated discussion on the toughest issues of the day. To get us here, we have a number of thank yous to express. First and foremost, first, we want to thank Juan Williams, who really brought this idea to us over 5 years ago and has been a mainstay of the program ever since. He's a founder and a moderator and has been an inspiration. Second, I want to thank Kiana Cassell and the rest of the Aspen Institute team. Kiana is the senior project manager at our program. She's really been untiring in her effort to bring this about in her direction of the rest of the staff, including Yamna Sarhan. Thank you. And we want to thank our partners in this venture, without whom it certainly would not be possible. And that includes the people at Comcast, including Brett Perkins, Johnny Giles, and Sharice Lilly. And all of them work for an extraordinary man whose civic portfolio is as big as his business portfolio, a man I truly look up to. No, he's really done a terrific job in guiding this corporation in a variety of efforts. The Executive Vice President of Comcast Corporation, David Cohn. David?
So thanks very much, Charlie. You can see by the adjustment of the microphone that Charlie was referring to physical height only in terms of who looks up to who. But good morning, everyone. It's great to see such a nice turnout, and good morning to our online audience. It's been Comcast's privilege to partner with the Aspen Institute from the very beginning of this series in 2011. And since that first symposium 4 years ago, the country has marked some significant anniversaries. This year, for example, marks the 50th anniversary of the courageous stand for racial justice in Selma, where John Lewis was brutally attacked along with the marchers he led at the Edmund Pettus Bridge on Bloody Sunday, a day that outraged the world and set the stage for Dr. King to lead the historic march from Selma to Montgomery only 2 weeks later, ultimately leading to the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And last year saw the 60th anniversaries of two fateful Supreme Court decisions from 1954. Brown versus Board of Education, which of course everyone knows about, and a case called Hernandez versus Texas, which is a case not nearly as well known, but a milestone in the Latino civil rights movement, and a victory for due process under law for all minorities that began with a challenge to the practice of excluding Mexican Americans from serving on juries in certain Texas counties. These and other civil rights anniversaries have had the effect of encouraging us to ask questions about how far America has come in the years since and how far we still have to go. But few doubt that the state of race in America is still a profound and often troubling issue of great complexity. And the last 12 months have brought us painful reminders of the distance between where we want to be on race relations and where we actually are. That distance was underscored by the fatal tragedies in Ferguson, on Staten Island, and just this month in North Charleston, South Carolina, along with the incident of mindless racism at the University of Oklahoma. All of them captured on and fueled by social media, and each of them leaving people of all colors shaking their heads and wondering, how do we advance the state of race in America? I'm not going to interpret those events this morning. MSNBC news anchor Richard Louie is much more qualified to do that, and he's going to come up here in just a few minutes, not to put any pressure on Richard. But I'd like to congratulate and thank the Aspen Institute and Charlie Firestone and his staff for the timely and relevant panels that have been created for us this morning. The subject of the first panel, Policing in America, is of course front and center for most Americans right now. As a lawyer and former chief of staff to Mayor Edward G. Rendell, I've had an up-close look at the challenges of urban policing and the disconnects that can develop between minority communities and the police officers sworn to protect those communities, even in a city with a racially diverse police force. Disconnects that can have tragic consequences, as we've seen. And I'm delighted that we have such a great panel to take up the issue of policing this morning. The subjects of the other two panels are even closer to our day-to-day life at Comcast, since they both involve high technology and employment diversity. And at Comcast today, we're particularly concerned about a specific class of information age victims, the low-income, disproportionately minority families stranded on the wrong side of the digital divide without home broadband connections. The cruel irony is that as important as the internet has become, how essential as it is to our lives, the divide between those who have broadband at home and those who do not have become greater, and the education deficit and information deficits have been exacerbated. There's actually this week released study by Pew, by Dr. John Horrigan, that underscores again the education gaps and the disadvantages that young minorities without internet access at home have in competing for 21st century education and 21st century job skills. So in August of 2011, we launched our Internet Essentials program to give low-income families broadband connections for $9.95 a month, the option to purchase a fully internet-capable computer for less than $150, and access to a full suite of digital literacy training and materials in print, online, and in person in English or Spanish. And I'm happy to report that we've now connected an amazing 450,000 families, representing 1.8 million low-income Americans. And to put that in perspective, 1.8 million is more than the populations of 96 of America's 100 largest cities, as well as 12 states and the District of Columbia. Broadband is a fundamental tool of life in 21st century America. Every American should have the opportunity to participate in the wonders and practical benefits of the internet. And assuring that all families have that tool is a significant step toward assuring equal economic opportunity, and Comcast is and remains committed to doing our part to achieve that reality. We feel the same way about employment diversity, and we're proud that Comcast is considered a diversity leader in the media and technology industries. With 59% of our total workforce being diverse, including 47% of our company's leaders at the vice president level and above, we are proud of the record we have accomplished, but also not standing on our laurels, know that we continue to have progress to be made. The relative lack of diversity among Silicon Valley tech companies and how to increase opportunities in the tech economy for all is the subject of our third panel. I'm encouraged by the lack of excuses coming out of Silicon Valley, and I think those companies have the talent and the commitment to radically improve their performance for the benefit of all of America. And despite the sober reminders of America's shortcomings on diversity, we need to remember that we are the most pluralistic society on earth. As New York Times columnist Tom Friedman reminded us last year when he asked, who else has twice elected a black man as president, whose middle name is Hussein, whose grandfather was a Muslim? So I'm confident we can continue to make racial progress as a country as long as we stay focused, and I deeply appreciate your being here in one of the few places where we can actually have a constructive dialogue and discussion and reflection on these important and very sensitive issues. So thank you again, Charlie, and I hope everyone enjoys the program.
Thank you, David. To lead us off, through each session, each year, we have somebody lead us off with kind of a report or a description of where we are. And this year we termed it the year in race. And we've asked Richard Louie, who is another mainstay of this activity. He has moderated, I think, every year but one. He's a news anchor for MSNBC. He's also a journalist for NBC News. He has 5 years experience at CNN Worldwide. He was the first Asian American to anchor a daily cable news show, and he is the only Asian American who does anchor a daily newscast in America today. He is also very active in community events and a number of community causes, particularly homeless housing. He has participated in over 200 community events, worked with the UN Foundation, the State Department, Harvard University, and many other places. He's a columnist. He's appeared in a number of recognizable publications, USA Today, Politico, Seattle Times, San Francisco, variety of other publications. And Richard has really impressed us by bringing a number of facts and research to his moderation in prior years. So he did such a great job, we said, let's have you lead off the entire thing. So welcome to the podium, Richard Louie.
Good morning, State of Race. Who has been here before? All right. And back for another 5th year, and it's really great to be here with all of you. I always walk away from this event a little bit more invigorated, and I'm looking forward to meeting a lot of you and seeing some friendly faces that I've seen over the years. And thank you so much. I appreciate that. Charlie and David, thank you for the pressure that you've now laid upon me for the next 10 or 12 minutes, and for your leadership, really, in the 5 years of sponsoring this event, the State of Race Symposium. Charlie Firestone, as well as Kiana Cassell, always smiling faces to talk to and organize an organization of this event. And of course, I must thank the guy that sits across the street from me, Juan Williams, and I'm not sure he's here yet because I don't see his famous blue suit. But Juan Williams, who's over there at Fox, and his leadership for this event. Yeah, it's my 3rd year here, although this is the 5th year for the State of Race. And I think I missed the first and the 2nd or 3rd one. This time, it certainly is an honor to be here to talk to you. because they've asked me to look at the year in race. And because I'm a journalist, I said, well, you know, why don't I offer a reporter's view? What are the stories that I've looked at over the last year? A short summary of pictures and thoughts from 2014 to 2015. And this year, as I was looking back, I mean, what popped up in my mind was that, you know, those two nouns, state and race, are at least as big or bigger, I believe, than they ever have been. How many times have I said this on air, used the word race? And indeed, when I was thinking about it, what is that one word that might describe the state of race today? And boy, was that tough. I mean, how can I describe the United States of America today? Now, unfortunately, plenty of studies, and we've heard some of those facts and ideas so far, tell us how far we must still go. Just yesterday, Charlie and I were talking about a reading that he had seen in the New York Times. Some of you may have seen that headline. That headline read, 1.5 million black men missing. And the data behind that study said they're gone from everyday life because, the report says, of early deaths or being behind bars. And that was just yesterday in that study coming out. So that is where I start on this great Tuesday. What were the headlines in recent times? As a journalist, what have been the stories that I've told, reported, written, or commented on with regard to our state of race? And I begin with some very familiar names. Walter Scott, 2015. Eric Garner, 2014. Michael Brown and Ferguson, 2014. Trayvon Martin, 2013. Rodney King and the LA riots, 1991. All of these stories that I've had to tell. Now, the first 5 deaths hit our airwaves, as many of you know, just within a year's time, not really much more than that. The last one, some 2 decades or more ago. But let's go further back to what ended up to be that important January holiday. And I go there because when America takes, and when it looks at, it takes stock of where it's at in its recent history of race relations, as we try to understand the state of race today, we cannot help but go back that far to understand where we are today. So I'm going to start with a report that I put out this year because I had to sit down and talk to my producers. How do I talk about that January holiday in this year 2015? Let's watch the screens.
Just a few hours, President Obama and the First Lady will honor Dr. Martin Luther King by participating in a community service project in Washington, D.C. Now, the holiday first celebrated the life of the civil rights leader in all 50 states in the year 2000. Today, the memories of the Georgia preacher are both old and new. The memories start with I Have a Dream.
We aren't going to let any injunction turn us around.
But there's also Martin Luther King Jr.'s numerous church speeches, the more than 1 million documents related to his life works.
This is Edwin Newman inviting you to meet the press.
And his 5 interviews on NBC's Meet the Press.
Do you believe that the American racial problem can be solved?
Yes, I do. I refuse to give up. I refuse to despair in this moment. I think in any social revolution, the one thing that keeps it going is hope.
Part of his revolution, 1983, President Ronald Reagan signed a bill making the Reverend the only American other than George Washington to have his birthday celebrated as a federal holiday. Today's memories come from newer faces and different places. The movie Selma, a new take on King's 1965 voting rights fight. Then there's this.
Was that Dr. King's dream?
An ad invoking King's name to criticize current immigration reform efforts. Today's voting rights debate, some say, echo the 1960s. And Ferguson, a wound as raw as it was a half-century ago. But as he said,
a nonviolent way does not bring about miracles.
Perhaps small miracles, like 5-year-old Maya on why King lived.
So that all people could go into the same restaurants and the same schools and the same drinking fountains. And we went all over the world to say peace to everybody.
Maya and Tyler live near Ferguson, Missouri, where Captain Ron Johnson marched for peace. much like some officers did during the 1960s civil rights era.
Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place.
He was murdered the next day. He did not live long, but his idea of America does.
And coming up, so I spent a lot of hours just on the last 3 lines of that. He was murdered the next day. He did not live long, but his idea of America does. And the reason why it was so difficult for me to finish that was because as I was writing that, I was thinking of those names I listed just a second ago. I was thinking of Garner, Martin, and Moore, and just too many. It was just so tough. Had his idea, as he was describing of America, had it fallen away in that last year as I was looking on that January holiday? Had America's hope also fallen a bit away? So trying to answer that, it reminded me of the video that started it all in my reporting history, and that was Rodney King in 1991. It was also one of the first stories I ever reported on. So for me, as I stood there in the streets of Ferguson, Missouri, I could not help but think of the streets of Los Angeles after that video aired. You know, 23 years later, as I was looking at the video, I was deciding like what portion I might show. But still, it was too painful, at least for me after all that time. But it shaped me as a journalist forever as the way I saw stories. And, you know, Ferguson did it again when I was there. Even though I didn't want to see LA happen again, it did right there. So I was older, and all the majority of my reporting on Ferguson was of the conflict, of what was happening in the streets. I also wanted to also talk about the good people, like Sam's Deli, the owner across from our compound, and what he did. The owner right there in the middle of Florissant Avenue, and an immigrant from the Middle East, a devout Muslim who believed in his middle-class customers that he served each and every day. That's what he was thinking of, not the looters that closed him down. So he, even though it was closed down once, and then twice, and then 3 times, he was still staying open. His employees even came in and worked for free. He even helped them take food home for free. Then there's this other amazing gentleman who came to our cameras one day during my first time reporting in Ferguson. That's Bradley Rayford, born near Ferguson, the year after the LA riots, in fact. And I interviewed him about the protests. He was a budding journalist. He had filmed video and he had interviews none of us network folks, despite being on the ground, had yet. He captured stories that we wanted to tell. He stuck around for hours after I finished interviewing him live. He was very vibrant, despite all that was happening around us, in the middle of the 90-degree heat. And he wanted to learn. That's clearly what he was thinking, and so he did. That picture that we see of him right there was from Thursday. He came to 30 Rock, and he spent 4 days with us. We've since hired this community college student to work freelance with us, and we'd love for him to be a long-time MSNBC and NBC News employee someday in the future to tell the great stories that he always has. You've seen his video on our networks. Some amazing stuff. Now, the owner of Sam's Deli, he is Ferguson, Missouri. That Bradley Rayford that I just showed you a picture of is also Ferguson, Missouri. And we need more stories like them, and that's why we need to concentrate on them. We certainly can't ignore the problems that the data shows us. In addition, we can't forget those who live the solution, which Bradley and the owner of Sam's Deli does. You know, Bradley was also compelling because he is the face of data that I was just looking at from the States of Change report that was put out by the American Enterprise Institute, Brookings Institution, as well as the Center for American Progress. The headline from their report, as you're probably very familiar with, is Minority as the Majority. And I thought I'd show you some of that data. This is America today. The states where minorities are the majority. We have got New Mexico, California, and Texas. If I take you forward to 2025, this is what we look like. You add in Nevada, Maryland, Arizona, and Georgia. And then I take it to 2040. Let's add in Florida, New Jersey, Alaska, New York, and Louisiana as well. And then this is the big year, 2044, when you count every person in America. Well, what we have now is a minority America, and no longer the minority America being a minority, 2044. And that's why the faces of Sam's Deli and Bradley Rayford are the state of race. in so many ways. Well, so this is interesting information, but do people like it? Not everybody, not so much. If you're younger, though, you're probably diverse. And if you're diverse, then you probably do like this development. Baby boomers, 32% see a more diverse United States in a positive light. We look at Gen Xers, that's 38%, millennials, 45%, and then you look at plurals, which Maggot has termed, and that is, there are those children who were born in 1997 or later. 47% of them think a more diverse America is good. The younger you are, you think diversity is positive. So the faces of the state of race are becoming blacker, browner, yellower, whatever color you can imagine, and this has broad implications for the votes of the state of race. Let's look at that. In fact, in 2016, though they will not be a majority, the minority populations in the key 11 swing states, as I show you here, are as much as 4 or 5 percentage points greater than they were just in 2012 when President Obama won. And in every single swing state, the minority population percentage is greater than the margin of victory that we saw in 2012, as much as 4 or 5 times. And who's behind these big numbers that we see here, like in Nevada, 39% of the eligible voters being minority? It is the older generation. The ones that are increasingly more valuable are those older minority voters. And you can just see the projection here in 2012 and how it increases over the next 3 or 4 decades. That trend only increases. So it's going to be the elderly minority vote that will become so key 2016 and beyond. Here are the challenges. Ineligible minority voters. In Latino and Asian voting groups, they tend to be younger and have non-citizens as a larger percentage. Just look at the circles here, the 2 on the right, and the mid-blue, very large in the Hispanic and Asian groups. And that's the question going forward, is how do they become involved and become eligible? Now here's the penalty. Most minorities, except for African Americans in the last 2 presidential elections, were underrepresented. The top line you see there, that's white voters, and below that African American, below that Latino American, and below that Asian American. 2012 and 2008, key for the African American vote, the first time by record of this research that we've ever seen above or outside of underrepresentation. And that trend, the question is in 2016, isn't it, is will we be watching 2 candidates that are ethnic minorities, presidential candidates like Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio? Will they reinforce this reversal? Will we come together in this line chart? Or will it turn around and go the other way? So one last thought on the vote of the state of race. Who is solidly immovable or staying on one side? Who was solidly undecided? And this is the way it looks according to research from the School of Public Policy at the University of California, Riverside, and Kartik Ramakrishnan. Recent polling shows that the Latino American vote pretty much on average in terms of swingability and numbers of undecided. African American, less undecided, more decided. Asian American, 4 times more undecided. Now, the interesting part about that one group is that back in 2012, they supported this president at a 73% rate. Yet, in 2014, they went the other way, and they took 52% of the Republican vote. So, are they swingable? They are. Finally, to add to the faces and the votes of the state of race, I just wanted to finish with the language of the state of race. How do you reach minorities? There's so many different ways. Whether you're a political candidate or a Fortune 500 executive, I would just want to offer a simple thought to spark the conversation throughout today. Now, the way you reach them, it may not be English, and it may not be through mass media. So here's a short piece that MSNBC put together for today's symposium that I'd like to finish with.
I announce my candidacy for President of the United States.
I'm running for President of the United States.
The most important announcement of their lives for the most powerful position in the world. And they leaned on social media to do it. What does that tell us? It tells us candidates want to quantify their efforts. After announcing, Ted Cruz got a mix of 5.5 million Facebook likes, shares, comments, and other interactions. Marco Rubio, 1.3 million interactions. Hillary Clinton, over 10 million. It also tells us candidates need millennials, 18 to 24-year-olds, native digital users, the so-called untapped youth vote. It also tells us candidates want the minority vote.
It's almost being able to directly communicate with different ethnicities, whether African American, Hispanic, or Asian.
Newer immigrants probably look at the social media a lot more than they would traditional.
The average American uses social media just over 7 hours a month, says Nielsen. Latino Americans over 8 hours. African Americans also over 8. And Asian Americans just under 7 hours. With streaming video use, the gap widens, as much as double the national average in the case of Asian Americans.
This is a very swingable electorate.
As for those candidates not big on social media,
they need to get on the boat.
$5 billion could be spent for this presidential election. But it's the free stuff, social media, that might tell us the most. Richard Louie, MSNBC, New York.
So the state of race, the faces, we talked about the votes, and just for a little bit, as you just saw, the language to reach minorities and the way that might be done. Some thoughts and pictures to remind us of the past year and the year to come in the state of race in that discussion. And if I take off the journalism hat just for a moment now, I am part of every one of those trends that I've just described. I am that piece of data. When I asked some Twitter followers, how would you describe this in one word? And I got the word fractious from one. Another said she was going to wait until the race started. Well, indeed it has, to her and to everybody else. The race to improve this state of race moves forward. That idea that America, and many here, wanted in the 1960s, today, here at the museum, will get a little bit closer, I believe, as Juan, Joaquin, and the final panel explore with all of you how to get to a better state of race.